Greetings and welcome to another episode of Businesstalk podcast. I'm your host Deepak. I'm delighted to welcome Lisa K. Solomon, designer in residence at the Stanford Design School. Lisa is a renowned educator, futuristic, and design strategist whose work empowers people to navigate complexity, envision bold possibilities, and foster civic responsibility. By bridging future thinking and design, she helps individuals and institutions develop the mindset and skills needed to shape a more thoughtful, resilient, and equitable future. At Stanford Design School, Lisa develops transformative learning experiences that prepare students for challenges that they can't yet predict. She leads innovative programs such as Vote by Design, Presidential Edition, and the Future's Happening, and teaches courses like Inventing the Future, where students explore long-term implications of emerging technologies. She also partners with the K-12 education community to integrate future thinking into 21st century learning. Lisa's thought leadership has been recognized by her inclusion in the Thinkers 50 Radar list and one of the IXDS Women of Design 2020. She has taught leadership and design at the California College of Arts, MBA in Design Strategy, and served as a founding chair of transformational practices at Singularity University. She is a frequent guest lecturer at global institutions and organizations focused on innovation, leadership, and systems change. Her LinkedIn courses, including Leading Like a Futurist and Redesigning How We Work, have reached thousands of learners. Through her writing and teaching, Lisa continues to champion practical strategies for leaders to embrace ambiguity and act with foresight and intention. In this episode, Lisa will share thought-provoking insights from her acclaimed and national bestseller book, Moments of Impact: How to Design Strategic Conversations that Accelerate Change and Create Better Businesses, a work that has been translated into more than a dozen languages. So without further delay, let's welcome Lisa K. Solomon to the podcast. Lisa, it's an honor and privilege to have you join us today.
Thank you so much for having me today, and thank you for that wonderful introduction.
Yeah. Lisa, what inspired you to write Moments of Impact? And how did your experiences as innovation strategist shape the approach you develop for designing strategic conversations?
Thanks so much for that question. I love that you started with the motivation, because I will be honest, just between you and me and all of your listeners, I did not set out to write a book. That was never my intention, my long-term goal. When I think back to my past self, that I thought of myself as an author. But I was steeped in a practice at the time called scenario planning, which helps leaders imagine multiple futures, taking information about what's unfolding today to project out into far futures to expand our sense of possibility. And I was working at a firm at the time called Global Business Network, which was started by some of the great scenario planners and thinkers of our time. Peter Schwartz, who did foundational work at Shell, Stuart Brand, who created the Whole Earth Catalog and the Long Now Foundation, and others. And I was working with my co-author, Chris Ertel, who's a social scientist and demographer. And both of us were incredibly nerdy about how do you get leaders comfortable with having conversations about the future. Because I don't know about you, but most leaders that I know don't like not knowing. They like knowing. But the idea and the whole premise of scenario planning is to help explore the future through discovery between ideas and between perspectives. So Chris and I, in our quest to try to get better at designing conversations for leaders about the future, we went looking for resources to help us with that. And what we found was that there were a lot of books on design, how to create products. There were a lot of books on strategy. Are you a first mover, fast follower? And there were a lot of books on conversation around interpersonal dynamics. But there were no books on how do you design strategic conversations. This idea that one of the most important leadership skills you can do is to bring people together with different perspectives that are aligned in caring about an important topic that will meaningfully impact their future. And together they're coming to this conversation in order to learn forward, in order to open up possibilities, not necessarily solve the issue right away, but discover and experiment towards a better, more robust outcome.
Very
So that's why
insightful.
we wrote it. We
Yeah.
wrote it because we couldn't find the book we needed. So then we went out and we wrote it.
Excellent.
And we interviewed over 140 people. We did a ton of background research, and we really wanted to create something that was super meaningful to leaders and students and anyone interested in driving positive change. I'll say one more thing about this opening is that we wrote this book almost 15 years ago at this point. By the time we, in terms of when we started working on it. This book is more important now than ever. I'm sure of it, right? Our world now today is more complex, filled with more ambiguity, and yet still this leadership skill of designing conversations does not exist in any formal way. So we think it's critical.
Fantastic. Lisa, you describe traditional meetings as often data drenched and ineffective. Why do you think so many organizational conversations fail to generate insights or action despite best intentions?
Yeah, I appreciate that last part, the best intentions. I do believe that most leaders do not wake up every day thinking, how do I waste people's time? How do I ensure that lots of people prepare lots of materials that then when we get together, everyone is bored and or we are only utilizing 20% of their energy, 30% of their brain power. I honestly feel like the reason why we don't do better more often is that we've never been taught. I really believe that. I believe that if we help more leaders learn the importance of this skill and give them time to practice, we will have better strategies. We will have more engaged management teams. We will have more adaptive organizations. But I believe that the reason why we tend to have these meetings still that are stuffed with data, stuffed with PowerPoints that don't really engage, is because that's what came before us. And so we think that's what makes for a successful meeting. But we've learned for our research that that's not the case. And in fact, we actually talk about throughout the book these, what we call them black belts, folks that use their intuition to do a different way. And so I'm very proud of all the different case studies and stories we have in the book, because there's not one way to do it. There's really a set of principles as opposed to a single recipe, but we're trying to break the old recipe of these terrible overdone PowerPoint. Now, I'm saying data is bad. Of course, data is bad. But if you're using data as a crutch, or if you're spending the bulk of your time explaining the data, you could send that ahead of time, right? The conversation is about unpacking what it means.
My friend often say PowerPoint is used by people who neither powerful nor have a point of view. So
Yeah, it is a crutch. And listen, PowerPoint can be used incredibly well, right? Like PowerPoint's just a tool. It's just the way we've used it, is just not reaching the humanity of it. And this is actually another point we make in the book. It's a little point, but I think it gets to your core question and one of the reasons why we wrote this book. Thanks to TED, the conference, and now TEDx and how it proliferated, and then YouTube and other channels, we now know what a great presentation looks like. We know it's moving. We know it's filled with visuals. We know it has energy. We don't really have the same kind of window into what a great conversation looks like. They're mostly behind closed doors. So again, we're just not surrounded by good examples, which is why I think it needs to be intentionally taught.
in book, you introduce a 5-part process for designing effective strategic conversations. Can you walk us through that process and explain how it differs from conventional planning or facilitate methods?
Yeah. We spent a lot of time coming up with this framework. It was kind of fun. It's fun when you land there. In the process, we're like, we can't get it. What we noticed around traditional meetings, because if you ask leaders, hey, have you ever been taught to run a meeting, or what does a good meeting look like? They'll be able to give you answers. They'll say, well, we started on time and ended on time. We covered all the things we needed to cover. And then what do you think the last thing is that they say? What makes for a good meeting? Any thoughts?
Yeah,
Usually what they
planning,
say, yeah. What are your
planning,
thoughts?
planning.
Planning, yeah. Usually what they say is, and we got to decisions. We got to next steps. What's a good meeting? We got to next steps. I understand that. Like, it's important. You want to see progress. You want to see planning. The challenge with that frame is that it's a very convergent frame. So we can get to next steps, but what if those next steps are wrong? What if those next steps are ineffective? Like, what we're racing to a place of conclusion because it feels comfortable that we've achieved something. So when we think about meetings, we think of them in a very narrow way. We talk about it like a bullseye, like you've hit the bullseye. But when you are exploring new territory, right, a novel problem that doesn't have any precedent, where there are no best practices or blueprints, you need a different frame. You need an explorer's mindset. So the framework that we came up with is more of a compass to help guide your way with these principles, not a bullseye that you're trying to hit, right? End on time, next steps. So we have 5 core principles. The first one that sets the compass is the purpose of the conversation. Why are you meeting to begin with? Why are you bringing people together? Why are you taking the most valuable asset that they have, which is their time, and you're asking people to invest it in your gathering, right? Your reason. So we talk about that as the core thing. So there are only really 3 purposes. One is to build understanding, right? To first spend time saying, like, what is this thing, right? Yes, there's this emerging technology called ChatGPT, but like what is it that we need to understand about ChatGPT? So like, what is the building? Then the next kind of conversation is shaping options. Once we all have an understanding of either the landscape or the problem we're trying to solve or what success looks like, what are the various options? That's like an ideating. And then the third is making decisions. But if you make decisions before you figured out the understanding of what you need to learn more about, that's why ideas don't go anywhere. So that's just the core principle. So number 1 is defining the purpose. And for each one of these, we have detailed chapters. And in the back of the book, we have the starter kit to just get going, right? Like, how do you get into that? Because we know people want action. So define the purpose. The second core principle is engaging multiple perspectives. So this idea is that the quality of your conversation is going to be dependent on the different perspectives you have around the room. Typically, we have the same perspectives. Typically, they're very close in. That doesn't allow us to learn more. And we can talk more about any one of these. I want to go through them pretty quickly. The third is this notion of framing the issue. So how you frame the issue is how you solve the problem. Again, nobody really teaches us that. The fourth is this idea of setting the scene. What does the environment feel like? We know as human beings, we are very responsive to the kinds of environments. So if you bring people together for a serious conversation about a serious topic and you pick the serious room, that's the boardroom with no windows and a big table and all these leather chairs and ahead of the table, our brain is taking that in as like status. You better not be wrong. It's like the worst place in the world to actually explore new ideas. And then the final principle is this notion of making it an experience. So not just going through agenda items, but really allowing for the full human connection, including emotion, which is often not welcome into a strategic conversation. So our point of view and what the research seems to suggest is when we allow emotions to be productively part of the learning process, we get to better outcomes. So those are the 5. There's not one way to do all the 5, but we provide lots of examples, lots of questions, lots of frameworks to help people change that fundamental frame of getting to next steps versus am I utilizing the talent in the room?
Very insightful. Lisa, you distinguish between strategic conversations and regular decision-making meetings. What makes a conversation truly strategic, and why does that distinction matter so much for leaders?
Yeah. It's a great question. And again, there's no one answer for it. I mean, I think like a quick rubric, I would say, on a strategic, conversation is it going to have high impact for your organization or your team or your product? And is it relatively uncertain? Meaning, do you need to get the perspectives in order to discover your way there? Look, if you're planning your holiday party, I don't know if you need multiple perspectives and, like setting the scene. We make this distinction in the book that comes from Ronald Heifetz, who is a professor at Harvard Business School, about this idea of technical problems and adaptive problems. Technical problems are often problems that have a known answer, even if it's complicated. Like building a bridge is not necessarily an easy thing to do, but thanks to research and architecture and material science, like we know how to build a bridge that will stand and withhold. How we are figuring out the future of work around emerging technology or geopolitical instability, that is an adaptive problem. There is not a single answer. Any one solution is going to have cascading effects and second and third order potential consequences. That requires a different kind of problem set solving approach. And we think strategic conversations are a critical part of that.
You argue that framing the issue is one of the most critical and often overlooked steps in designing impactful conversations. How can leaders learn to frame challenges more effectively?
This was the hardest chapter to write. My gosh, was this hard. It's such an abstract context. Like, how do you frame an issue? So it's challenging because it's often invisible. We often just take it for granted that whatever question was asked is the question that we should be spending time on. What's so great, and I thought about this preparing for this conversation, is that all of this conversation around, again, generative AI and this idea that we have to learn to prompt, that's going to help people become better framers. Because in some ways, prompt engineering is a little bit like paying attention to how you're framing the question. And it's such a quick feedback response of if you put in the wrong, if you get the wrong response, it's probably you. In some ways, obviously, I'm not a technical expert on data sources and all the rest, and we're in the middle of that. But my point is that where you situate the starting point of the discovery will have huge consequences in the threads of the conversations that follow. And in design thinking, we often talk about this idea of fall in love with the problem, not the solution. What we mean there is before you solve anything right, solve the right it. Like, what is the thing you're really solving for? And that takes some patience and some time.
The book emphasizes bringing together people with diverse backgrounds and perspectives. What have you learned about how to create the conditions for productive collaboration, especially across silos or disciplines?
Yeah, it's a great question. And certainly the topic of diversity is one that, cycles in and out of our consciousness. When we say diversity, we're really focused on making sure you are inviting different lived experiences, different perspectives into the room in order to ensure that you are widening your surface area of information. And I don't just mean research or data. I mean what are, or even the qualitative insights that might come up. And so we actually had this chart in the book of diversity of diversities. So learning style is a diversity. Where you sit within an organization is diversity. Oftentimes we don't invite the junior people into the room, and yet they have the most proximate knowledge of what's happening. We often don't invite customers or even, God forbid, competitors into the room. So really thinking about who might help advance the conversation in interesting and important and divergent ways is super important. It's one of the reasons why in my classes, I often teach this idea of expansive networking, building relationships across difference, the idea of the strong value of weak ties, like why it's important to have very far-reaching connections. It's because it's going to help you develop ideas faster. It's going to help you test those ideas faster. It's going to help you scale those ideas faster. So I think, it's really about, first of all, challenging your own notion about what diversity means. And then the second thing actually just comes down to some core principles of empathy. Like, how do you ensure that people feel welcome to put their best talent to work, to share their ideas? Getting them there is the first part, but in getting them to engage is a whole other part. I'll tell you one of my favorite stories. It's not in the book, but I heard it after. There was a gentleman I met who worked in innovation within the U.S. Coast Guard. And if you know anything about the military, I did not serve. My father did, thank you very much, for his service and all that do. My understanding is pretty hierarchical. So he knew that everyone, he had 50 people in the room of different ranks, but he knew everyone was really going to listen to the highest ranked general in the room and what they said. And, so regardless of being there, right? Like they've already done the thing. They've given their time. They're not doing other work. They're there. But if they're just waiting to see what the general does, like what's the point of being there? So he had them do this ideating session where they came up with different ideas. And during lunch, he rewrote all of the Post-it notes to be in a neutral handwriting so people could not guess like the handwriting of the general. So you really just like want a lower status and you want to signal that all ideas really matter. And people pick up on the cues. It's, I think, very dangerous when a leader will say, every idea is a good idea, every idea is welcome, but underneath it all is a culture that punishes outliers or punishes people that ask divergent questions. So it's not just stating your expectations, but it's also really modeling them.
You write the strategic conversation should aim to generate insight rather than force agreement. How can leaders balance open-ended exploration with the need to eventually make decisions?
Yeah. It's a tricky question. And again, I would say it starts internally, to say to a leader, are they comfortable, first of all, saying, I don't know the answer to this. The reason why we're here today is because we're going to explore some new ways to think about this tough problem. So already we're asking leaders to take a risk, right? We're asking leaders to be vulnerable. We're asking leaders to be curious. That is tough for a lot of leaders who rose up the ranks because they got right answers, because they performed. So this is already a tricky ask, number one. The other is, for them to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. So kind of part of that is like, hey, look, you may bring all these people together and you're inviting different perspectives. It may not come up to a tidy, neat bow at the end of a clear answer. So now you have to be comfortable with what that might elicit. Two parts to that. One is then you have to say, like, what am I going to do to help further this or develop a point of view that's aligned with the values of the company or the values with what we've promised our shareholders. And the other is to have other methods to advance it even amid that ambiguity. So, and like their own timeline for how long they're going to sit in that ambiguity. But again, these are things we don't often practice.
Lisa, could you share a story from the book or from your own experience where a well-designed strategic conversation lead to a breakthrough insight or organizational shift?
Yeah. It's a great question. I have so many. And the thing about them, the reason why the book is called Moments of Impact, you don't always know. It's not like, and at 10:31, here's the moment of impact. You don't know. We have this idea of like you prep like hell, you design all the details, you really sweat all those things, and then you got to let go. Then you got to see what emerges. I'll share a couple quick stories. One, it's one of my favorite ones. It is in the book. It's a project I did with Toyota Financial Services a long time ago. So, I guess over 15 years ago, Toyota Financial Services sits within the Toyota Motor Company, but their job is to help finance cars to allow customers to buy them. We gather the top 60 leaders within the organization globally together for an offsite. So maybe, again, your listeners can appreciate we have an important set of strategies to contend with. In this case, Toyota was still coming back they had some malfunctions with their accelerator pedal, so their reputation was going down. There were all of these environmental issues at Toyota, and some of the factories were in trouble. Like there was a lot of external things happening, and they really wanted to get the leadership team on the same page and to help think about innovative strategies going forward, knowing that there was a lot in flux. And we did a great job. We did business model evaluation. We had different speakers. It was a well-designed set of strategic conversations. It really was like first we were building understanding, then we were shaping options, we were getting towards making decisions. But my favorite part of the moment of impact that I love so much, and people were engaged and all the rest, was that moment that happens after you've completed something where you've separated yourself from your day to day. You've had this great experience, you're feeling charged up, and then you're like, oh, I got to go back on Monday and I got to go back to my real work. And again, if you're not thoughtful about the transition of how to toggle between where you ended and how that informs your next work stream, it's usually like, that was fun, but that was like whatever. It was a moment in time. It wasn't a moment of impact necessarily. So my favorite part was when the CEO gets up there at the very end. And I did not script him to do this, but he was watching everything and he was listening. And he said, I want to be very clear. If you do not think that what we just described today is your day job, then you are not paying attention. This is not some extra thing that happened. This is your day job. This is it. This has to continue. And I have never really seen such an emergent declarative statement about expectations that have come from that kind of investment in that way before. What I often see, on the contrary, is after all this hard work and wrestling with ideas and being uncomfortable, a CEO or a leader will get up there and be like, okay, so let me tell you about the plan going forward that they had before the thing even started. And what they don't realize is that when people experience that, where they've put like their best ideas out there and they don't even get considered, you break trust. It's not even that they wasted their time, which of course they did. They break trust. So this idea that the CEO would be like, let me be so clear about this. This is your day job. That was incredible. So I love that.
You include a practical starter kit in the book. What are one or two tools from the kit that listeners can begin using right away to improve the quality of their own meetings or conversations?
Yeah. I love that starter kit. It's so helpful. And one thing that I would say, even before one or two tools from the kit, I would say I love the way we organized it. There's 4 components to each of those 5 principles. And so we wanted to create some consistency. And we were really designing it for utility. So the first category is ask this. So again, when the number one thing I could tell people when they are designing a strategic conversation is to be curious, right? They are stewarding a set of choices that will impact others. So they have to know like what it is that they're doing. So ask this, do this, meaning like these are like basic, like non-negotiables, right? Do this, try this, here are some variations, and read this. So for the nerdy people like me that like can't get enough of this, that see conversations everywhere, this is where I could go deeper. So I feel really proud of that whole resource because you can jump to it however you need. Wow, I'm really struggling with thinking about engaging different people. How do I go to that one? Be like, ask this, like who's impacted? Who are the outliers that you want to bring in? Are there any artists? So it's incredibly helpful. I would say the number one thing that I like to do anytime I'm asked to design a high stakes conversation is I like to ask, tell me about the evening after. What are people thinking? What are they feeling? What are they empowered to do? Let's design backwards. Where do you want to land? If people don't know where that is, then you're not ready to start bringing people together. So really, and it's very telling too. I want them to know that this will happen, right? Okay, well that's an explanation meeting. That's not a discovery meeting. So really designing backwards is absolutely critical, and not just on the no, because again, you could send stuff ahead of time. It's like, what do you want them to feel? Oh, I want them to feel inspired. I want them to feel energized. I want them to feel surprised. I want them to feel urgent. I want them to feel empowered. So all of that will dictate a different set of choices if you have clarity on that.
Lisa, my last question. In today's world of rapid change and uncertainty, how do you see the role of strategic conversation evolving, and what skills will tomorrow's leaders need to design moments of impact?
I think about this a lot. Listen, we talk about in the book that strategic conversations are an adaptive approach to a world that is filled with more volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, this VUCA world. Okay, we wrote this 15 years ago. Well, at least like I said, we start working on it. I mean, the world was so simple then compared to where it is now. We are on VUCA on steroids. My colleague Scott Dorley likes to say, our nervous systems are nervous. We are underprepared for the level of complexity and ambiguity and change that's happening at warp speed. We have not taken classes on ambiguity. We are not comfortable sitting without complete answers. We tend to have not experienced improvisation that allows us to move in ways that are emergent. Strategic conversations is our best opportunity to lean into that volatility. When you do strategic conversations well, you not only build more resilient organizations and adaptive organizations, you put yourself in the best place to come up with new ideas of where the world is going, to be anticipatory, to have applied imagination, to be able to say, I don't have all the answers, but I can sense that this is going to be a robust move. So we have a chapter at the end that talks about strategic conversations as the best organizational capacity that you could build. So you individually can develop it, even better to teach others so that you're constantly having the opportunity to be adaptive in this world that promises to only speed up, not slow down. So that's my hope.
Thank you, Lisa, for joining us today and sharing such thoughtful insights from moments of impact. Your work reminds us that in a world full of complexity and constant change, the quality of our conversations can shape the quality of our decisions and ultimately our impact. From reframing challenges to designing purposeful dialogue, your approach offers a much needed shift away from static meetings towards dynamic, collaborative problem solving. We are especially grateful for the practical tools and inspiring examples you have provided that our listeners can begin applying right away. To our audience, if you are looking to transform how your team works through big, messy challenges, I highly recommend diving into Moments of Impact. It's more than a book, it's a playbook for leading change through conversations. Thank you so much, Lisa, for joining us.
Thank you so much. What a pleasure.